The hat was the first thing we noticed, floating open on the dark water, spinning slowly beside the hull, as if it was still waiting for its owner to reach out and take it back. The sea was rough, but not rough enough to explain that. No one said a word. We only watched. Thomas Wright was not aboard. Captain Nathaniel Sharper ordered the men counted twice. The number did not change. One was missing. One was always missing. The deck was still wet from the night before, and near the rail there were confused marks, footprints, dragged water, nothing that could be called proof. If someone had fallen screaming, we would have heard it, said the first mate, John Clint. No one disagreed. Thomas was not liked, but he was not trouble either. He drank too much, spoke too loudly, laughed at the wrong moments, like so many others. The difference was that morning, he was not there to defend himself. The captain asked where each man had been the night before. The answers came too quickly. Sleeping, on watch, drinking alone. All normal, all possible, all useless. The ship needed to sail. But a ship without answers begins to creak from the inside. Eyes lingered too long. Conversations died the moment someone approached. The name Thomas Wright began to weigh more in death than it ever had in life. I stayed quiet. My name is Bartholomew Pargo. I am not a captain, nor a first mate. I was never the kind of man who drew attention. I watched as the others spoke, as their stories adjusted to one another, as fear searched for a face to wear. When the hat finally sank and disappeared, someone said it was better that way. I agreed in silence, because no one saw who pushed him, and at that moment, I already knew that someone would pay for it. The ship was called Providence, a name chosen more out of superstition than faith. It was neither large nor particularly fast, but it had crossed enough seas to leave scars in its wood and in its men. At night it creaked as if complaining about its own weight, and no one aboard slept without growing used to that sound. Routine was simple and harsh. Watches changed without ceremony. Food was rationed, water carefully measured. The mood of the crew shifted with the wind, and there were days when there was no wind at all. On those days silence became unbearable, and a single careless word could turn into trouble. Captain Nathaniel Sharper ruled more by habit than by authority. He did not shout much. He did not need to. A tired look was enough to remind everyone that he had buried too many men to be moved by bravado. Still, something in him was beginning to fail. Decisions took longer. Orders came out dry, as if repeated only out of duty. The first mate, John Clint, made up for that with urgency. Where the captain hesitated, he cut. Where there was doubt, he demanded answers. The crew respected him, but did not love him, and that was enough to keep the deck in line. Among the common men, alliances were fragile. Peter Grill spoke too much when he drank. Briggsgate spoke too little, always. Pierre Holley, a foreigner, carried the weight of being different. His accent never helped, and trust came slowly. Thomas Wright was just another man, strong enough to work, weak enough to drink too much. He laughed loudly, poked at old wounds, but he was not cruel, just tiring. On another day, in another mood, no one would have cared about him. I watched all of this from the outside. Bartholomew Pargo demanded attention. I did my work, listened more than I spoke, and learned quickly whom to avoid and when to stay quiet. On a ship like that, survival was not about being the strongest. It was about being the least noticed. On the night Thomas disappeared, nothing seemed different. The sea was restless, the deck wet, the drink flowing as it always did when boredom set in. We laughed, argued, and each in his own way tried to forget another bad day. It was only the next morning that we understood something small had slipped out of control. And when that happens at sea, the mistake does not sink alone. The day began wrong before anyone said a single word. The deck was still damp from the night before, and the smell of salt mixed with stale drink hung in the air like a warning. Men emerged from their corners rubbing their eyes, complaining about heavy bodies, empty stomachs, and the heat that arrived too early. Everything felt far too normal for what was about to be revealed. It was Briggsgate who noticed first. "Where's Wright?" he asked, not raising his voice. No one answered right away. Thomas Wright was not punctual, but he was not the sort to miss the start of the day either. Someone laughed, saying he must be passed out somewhere in the hold. Another suggested he had been sick during the night. Captain Nathaniel Sharper stepped out of his cabin with slow strides, adjusting his coat. He looked around with the tired expression of a man who already expected trouble. "Count the men," he said quietly. They counted once, then again. Each name answered in a different tone, some irritated, others still half asleep. When IT ended, no one needed to say anything. One was missing. Thomas Wright called the first mate. John Clint, louder now, silence. The captain drew a deep breath and walked to the rail. That was when everyone saw the hat, floating beside the hull, spinning slowly, caught for a moment between two waves before drifting away. No one moved. He fell, someone said, more as an attempt than a conclusion. Fell without screaming? John Clint replied, strange. The captain kept his eyes on the water for a few seconds longer than necessary, then he turned. I want to know where each of you was after the last watch change. The murmuring began low, but it was cut short. One at a time, John said, and tell the truth, this isn't tavern talk. Peter Grill went first. He said he had drunk too much and slept near the mast. No one questioned it. Peter always drank too much. Briggs Gate stated he had been on watch until near midnight and then went to sleep. His voice never changed tone. Briggs never explained more than necessary. Pierre Holley hesitated for a second before speaking. He said he had been alone, drinking, near the starboard rail. Several glances turned toward him too quickly. Pierre noticed, but said nothing. Others spoke, similar stories, predictable routines. Nothing stood out enough to accuse anyone, and in a way that was the worst sign. And you, Bartholomew? The captain finally asked. I raised my eyes. Sleeping, sir. Same place as always. He watched me for a moment, then nodded. The captain dismissed the group, but no one truly dispersed. Small circles formed, low voices, questions not asked directly. The word accident began to circulate, but no one seemed comfortable with it. John Clint pulled the captain aside. If we let this die like that, it'll turn into something else, he said. Fear grows when it has no name, and if we give it the wrong name, Sharper replied. It's still a name. The day dragged on heavily. Work was done on instinct alone. Ropes were hauled without conversation, sails adjusted without song. Thomas Wright was no longer spoken of by his full name. He became him, then nothing at all. Near midday, someone mentioned that Thomas had argued with Pierre Holley the night before. It was not a direct accusation, just a memory tossed into the air. It was enough Pierre sensed the change immediately. Where there had been indifference before, there was now distance. He tried to speak, to explain that the argument had been nothing, drunken nonsense. The more he spoke, the more suspicious he seemed. The captain summoned Pierre to the cabin in the afternoon. When he came out, his face was pale, his eyes hard. He did not say what had been asked. He did not need to. He lied. Someone whispered, or talked too much. Another replied. By late afternoon, the wind was still weak. The ship made little progress. The sea seemed to want to listen. The captain gathered everyone again. I won't pretend this didn't happen, Sharper said. A man fell from my deck. By accident or not, it weighs on all of us. He looked at every face. But I won't stop the ship for it. Tomorrow we keep our course. Some nodded. Others did not. When night fell, no one drank the same way. Conversations died when someone approached. Pierre Holley sat alone, as he had many times before, but now it felt like confirmation of guilt. I watched it all in silence. I saw how fear chooses its targets. I saw how the absence of answers creates hunger for a culprit. I saw how a man can be pushed out of the group without anyone touching him. When the moon rose, the sea was calmer. Thomas Wright's head visible. The deck, however, remained wet, and all of us knew, even without saying it aloud, this was not over yet. On the second night without Thomas Wright, no one drank to celebrate, they drank to endure. The Providence moved slowly, as if the sea took pleasure in stretching the voyage. The slower the ship advanced, the more time there was to think, and thinking aboard a ship was always dangerous. Men began to look at one another as if every face hid a blade. Captain Nathaniel Sharper kept the work routine intact, as though habit could stitch the wound close. But every order he gave was followed by an uncomfortable pause, as if the crew were weighing whether it was still worth obeying. The first mate, John Clint, had no such patience. He paced the deck like a hunting dog, stopping behind conversations, staring at hands, watching who stepped away too quickly. His presence straightened backs and swallowed words. John did not need to threaten. He was the threat. That night, the first push, the social one, happened. Peter Grill started talking loudly, drunk enough to feel brave. "I saw Pier near the rail," he said, jerking his chin in that direction. "I saw him." It was not a complete sentence, not a formal accusation, but it was enough for the entire deck to lean toward Pier Holley. Pier raised his eyes slowly, as if measuring the weight of every face. His accent had always bothered some of them. Now it sounded like a sentence, waiting to be signed. "I was alone," Pier said, "like I said yesterday. And that's convenient, isn't it?" Peter laughed, but no one laughed with him. Briggs Gate said nothing. He stood with his arms crossed, as if keeping silent to avoid commitment. But his eyes did the work. They looked at Pier as though the decision had already been made. John Clint stepped forward. "No fighting," he warned. "Not yet." Pier clenched his fists. Thomas fell. It was an accident, without a scream. Peter pressed without a sound. Pier took a deep breath, forcing himself not to explode. At night, with drink, on a wet deck, any man can fall. What he said was sensible, and that was precisely why it sounded rehearsed. I stayed quiet, as always. I watched how Pier's words, though true, only made things worse. I watched how the group needed a culprit more than it needed the truth. And that night I understood what John Clint already knew. The ship would not survive a mystery, but it would survive an injustice. The next morning, the captain called everyone to the main deck. The sky was far too clear, the kind of sky that made tragedy feel even more human. The sea rolled calmly, indifferent. Nathaniel Sharper stood before the crew with his hands clasped behind his back. He did not look angry. He looked tired. Tired of the sea, of command, of choices that were never clean. Beside him, John Clint held a small list written on course paper, as if that alone could give the moment some sense of legitimacy. "This is not a court," the captain said, "but it's not a tavern either. A man disappeared from my ship. I will not pretend it didn't happen." He looked at Pier Holley. "Pier, you were seen near the rail. You argued with Thomas. You don't have enough friends here to swear for you." Pier stepped forward. "I argued, yes, like many here have argued. Thomas drank and talked too much, but I did not touch him. I'm not an idiot, Peter, just a foreigner." A few nervous laughs followed. Others stayed silent. The captain raised his hand. "If anyone has something that proves otherwise, speak now." Nothing. Silence was the fastest decision on the ship. John Clint cleared his throat. "Then we vote. Like men who need to stay alive." It was not a fair vote. It was a vote of collective survival, the kind that does not ask what happened, but what calms us. One by one, hands were raised. Some men stared at the deck as they voted. Others looked straight at Pier without blinking. Peter raised his hand quickly, as if afraid Pier might escape if he hesitated. Briggs raised his hand without expression. I raised mine last. The captain drew a long breath when he saw the result. "Tie him," he said quietly. Pier tried to resist, but four hands seized him. He spat on the deck and shouted names. He called everyone cowards. He called the captain weak. He called John Clint a butcher. And then he did something worse. He looked at him only for a second. Not because he knew, but because intuition sometimes brushes against the truth without understanding it. The execution was neither fast nor theatrical. It was practical. When it was over, no one celebrated. The problem was that the silence began to work again, and that made everyone believe they had chosen correctly. After Pier Holley died, the ship breathed as if it had taken a weight off its chest. There was no real relief, only the false sense that the world had snapped back into place. The men spoke a little more. They laughed carefully. They drank with a strange discipline, as if rum might be guilty too. Some avoided looking at the rail where Thomas Wright had vanished. Others stared at it too long, as if expecting his hand to rise out of the water. Captain Nathaniel Sharper did not change course, but something in him shifted. I saw it in the small things, the way he waited a second longer before speaking, as if weighing every order, the way his eyes swept the deck as though counting ghosts. He knew, or suspected, that he had done something wrong. He simply could not say it out loud. Captains do not survive by confessing weakness. First mate John Clint, on the other hand, seemed more whole than ever. He moved with a hard satisfaction, as if Pierre's death were proof of efficiency. To him, the ship needed a scar, not the truth, and now it had won. On the third night after the execution, I was woken by footsteps. They were not sneaking footsteps. They were the footsteps of someone who did not want to seem as if he was sneaking. A man walking like he had the right to be there. I recognized the rhythm. John Clint. I lay still in my hammock, eyes open in the hold's darkness, listening to the wood groan above. John did not come down. He stayed on deck. He walked from one end to the other, stopped, started again, as if patrolling a thought. That was the first time I felt true fear. Not fear of being discovered, but fear of realizing the ship remained sick even after it had killed an innocent man. The silence had returned, yes, but now it was a dirty silence, a silence hiding too much. The next morning, the wind picked up and the Providence gained speed. The sea looked more alive, and the crew stayed busy. Even so, the death had not been forgotten. It had only changed places. It left the deck and moved into their eyes. I saw Peter Grill staring into emptiness as if he still saw Pierre tied up there. I saw Briggsgate washing his hands more often than necessary, rubbing his fingers as though the rope had left a mark. I saw the captain facing the horizon, but not truly looking anywhere. And then the worst kind of thing happened aboard a ship. A conversation began. It was near the water cask. Late in the day, Peter, loose-mouthed and to light at heart, said, "Funny, after Pierre died, it stopped." John Clint turned slowly. "Stopped what?" Peter realized too late he had spoken too loudly. The problem, Thomas." He scratched his neck. "No one goes missing now." Briggsgate grunted, almost inaudible. He was the problem. The captain, only a few steps away, heard. He did not cut it off. That surprised me. Sharper usually killed any talk that might spark a fight or a mutiny, but now he seemed interested, as if that sentence had touched a point he could not reach on his own. And what if he wasn't? The captain asked suddenly. The deck went quiet. Peter tried to laugh, but the sound died quickly. "Captain, with respect, you already decided." "I decided because I had to decide," Sharper replied. "Not because I was sure." His honesty struck them. A captain admitting that was like seeing a cracked mast. You know the ship can still sail, but you also know it will come down in the next storm. John Clint stepped forward. "Don't start this, Captain. The ship needs order, and order bought with innocent blood is what?" Sharper shot back, his voice hardening in a way I had not heard before. John's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might answer with violence, but he held himself back. He was not stupid. He knew striking the captain invited the whole ship into chaos. "So you want to reopen it?" John asked coldly. Sharper was silent too long. My palms sweated, because I knew what would happen if that question kept circling. That night, the captain ordered the watches doubled. He said it was because of enemy ships. No one believed him. Doubled watches were to watch men, not the sea. I stayed alert, more alert than any of them, not out of courage, out of necessity. The deck was dark, lit only by weak lanterns. The sea slapped the hull with steady rhythm, like a clock. Wind whistled through lines and rigging. John Clint had the watch. I saw him approach the rail. He stopped. He stared down at the water and stood there, motionless, as if speaking to something that did not speak back. He did not know the truth, but he was close to it. Too close. The next day, John began asking a different kind of question, not about Pier, about Thomas, who drank with him before he vanished, who spoke to him last, who was near the rail. Simple questions tossed out like hooks. Peter tangled himself up. First, he said he'd seen Thomas near the mast. Then he said near the rail. Then he said he didn't remember. Briggs said he saw nothing. I said I slept. And for the first time, John Clint did not seem satisfied with my answer. He looked at me differently, as if I had changed without changing. You sleep too well, Pargo, he said, almost casually. I work well, I answered. He nodded, but did not smile. That night, the captain summoned me to his cabin. I walked there with a heavy heart but a calm face. The cabin smelled of old wood and spilled rum. Sharper sat with deep-set eyes. Bartholomew, he said, you're a quiet man. Yes, sir. Quiet isn't the same as innocent. I kept silent. He stared at me. I've lost men to the sea. Many? Some by my error, some by bad luck, some by another man's hand. But he drew a breath. Thomas Wright fell without screaming. I felt my blood turn cold. The captain went on. I was on deck that night, not all through the dark hours, but some, and I heard nothing. I swallowed. Maybe he was very drunk. Sir, drunk or not, a man falls and he screams, or he hits, or someone screams for him. The captain rose slowly and went to the small window, looking out at the black water. I ordered Pier Holley killed. He said it as if swallowing a nail, and I haven't slept right since. He turned back to me. If you know anything, this is your chance to save what's left of this ship. I could have confessed then, but confession doesn't bring Thomas back. Confession only changes which body the sea carries. I thought of Pier, tied up, shouting names, and pictured my own neck in that rope. I pictured the crew's relief in blaming me. I pictured John Clint saying, now it's done. I knew it would be done. The wrong way. I don't know anything, sir, I said. The captain watched me for a long time. Then he nodded, defeated. You can go. When I stepped out, John Clint stood in the narrow passage. He watched me as if expecting to read something on my face. The captain is weak, he said quietly. If he starts doubting what he did, this ship breaks. And what if he's right to doubt? I asked. John moved closer. Then someone lied very well. He stood to near enough that I could smell old tobacco on him. Go to sleep. Pargo, he said. I went. But I didn't sleep. The next dawn brought a storm. Not big enough to sink the ship, but big enough to make the decks slick and the sky moonless. Men ran, hauling lines, shouting orders, trying to keep everything in place. The perfect chaos for an accident, and in the middle of that chaos, John Clint slipped. I saw him go down near the rail. It was fast. One wrong step, his body sliding sideways. Instinct took me forward. I grabbed the sleeve of his coat. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw something in him that tore me open from the inside. He wasn't afraid of the fall. He was afraid of what the fall would mean. You, he began to say, but his sleeve slid through my wet fingers, and John Clint fell into the sea. The splash was swallowed by the storm. There were shouts, yes, many, men running, lanterns thrust into the dark, ropes thrown out. But no one found him. The captain went pale as canvas. Peter cried, swearing he'd seen a hand. Briggs stood still as stone. I remained frozen, breath short, heart beating like a war drum. The storm eased later, and the calm that followed did not bring peace. It brought the final weight, because in that moment I understood the sea's perfect irony. Thomas Wright fell without a scream. John Clint fell screaming, and still the sea took them both. The next morning, Captain Sharper did not gather the crew. There was no tribunal, no vote, no John to demand it. The captain looked like a broken man. We sail, he said, and nothing more. The Providence sailed on, and for days no one spoke the name Thomas Wright, nor Pier Holley, nor John Clint, but I spoke them, alone, in my head. I saw the scene every night, the wet deck, the drink, the small irritation, my hand against Thomas's chest. The shove too short to be a decision, and too large to be forgotten. And the truth I had hidden even from myself for too long finally took full shape. I did not kill Thomas because I wanted to. I killed Thomas because I could, and because, for a moment, I wanted him to stop laughing. Years later, I still hear the sound, not the sound of a body hitting the water. The sea swallows that quickly. It is the sound of wet planks beneath hurried boots, the groan of old wood, the breathing of men who pretend innocence because it is easier than facing their own share of blame. Captain Nathaniel Sharper was never arrested, never hanged, but I heard, through dockside mouths, that he stopped commanding ships. He became a small man on land, always staring at the sea as if waiting for it to call him back and let him finish a sentence he never could. Peter Grill disappeared into some tavern. Briggs Gate died of fever. No one wrote anything about Pier Holley, because no one likes remembering the innocent man who helped keep a ship in order. I, Bartholomew Pargo, kept sailing. I learned to smile at the right moments. I learned to be useful. I learned not to look dangerous. And above all, I learned that the worst kind of killer is not the one who plans. It is the one who pushes, and then lets the world choose someone else to pay.